Su nombre es Ryan. Empezó su proyecto desde los 6 años y ha continuado hasta la fecha de hoy. Ryan tiene ahora su propia fundación, Ryan's World Foundation.
Can we get the next slide? I don't know the computers. But my story started when I was in grade 1. So I would have been 6 years old. And when I was 6 years old, life was simple. I went to school, I tried not to upset my teachers, and that was it.
Mi historia empieza desde que tenía los 6 años y en primaria mi maestra nos invitó a formar parte del proyecto.
Yeah, but life was simple, life was good. And I had a roof over my head and I went to school and learned. But every year at my school, we used to do an annual charity fundraiser. It was like a routine. Like every year we had to do something, like a camp food drive, raise money for cancer. And every year we do something.
Cada año en la escuela tendría a participar en donaciones, ayudar a niños con cáncer, con SIDA. Y la vida era simple para mí.
Except this year, I had a teacher, she was in her very first year of teaching. Her name was Mrs. Press. And she wanted to do something a little bit different. So she thought, let's do a fundraiser for other kids that are your own age, and we'll raise money for specific things for kids.
Ok, en ese año mi maestra de primaria, la señora Prest, nos invitó a formar parte de un nuevo proyecto, ayudar a otro tipo de gente con otras necesidades. Ella apenas llevaba un año enseñando en la escuela.
So I remember Mrs. Press brought in this long list of things that kids didn't have. And it was like pencils, notebooks, food, all these things that kids didn't have. And on that list was $70, 70 Canadian dollars, so like 700 pesos, would buy a well. And that was important because there were kids our age that couldn't go to school and sometimes even died because they didn't have clean water.
En ese año nos decía la maestra que había niños sin lápices, sin cuadernos, incluso sin materiales esenciales para ir al colegio. Entonces nos motivó a hacer una colecta y juntar $70 para, que son más o menos 800 pesos mexicanos en aquel tiempo, y juntarlos para ayudar a una organización.
So we were 6 and 7. So we didn't understand at all what my teacher said. One of my classmates asked, why don't you just go to the water fountain? Duh, problem solved. And my teacher had to look at us and say, no, that's not how that works. And explain that not everyone has wells or waters or tap. And some kids had to walk as far as 5 kilometers to go get it.
Era un reto para nosotros, ya que como niños no juntábamos el dinero y no teníamos nada en la vida, prácticamente dependientes de nuestros padres.
So when my teacher said 5 kilometers, that didn't help because we didn't know what that meant. So she tried to explain it and she said, that's 5,000 steps. That didn't help either. I couldn't count that high. But I remember I counted the steps it took me to get from my classroom to the water fountain.
La maestra nos habló de los niños de África que no tenían agua para beber y tenían que caminar aproximadamente 5,000 kilómetros para ir por aguas y...
Steps.
No, 5 kilómetros, perdón. 5 kilómetros para ir por aguas.
No, that's
5 kilómetros para ir por agua y entonces es algo en lo que yo pensé.
And I counted the steps it took me, and I counted 10.
Los pasos que a mí me tomaba llevar al grifo de agua eran 10 pasos nada más.
And I just came out of kindergarten, so one thing that I remember as a kid, like we were forced to do, was share. And when we heard that we weren't sharing, and there were kids that didn't have water, it made us a little bit angry actually, because we felt we had been lied to, that we weren't sharing after all.
que cuando somos niños se nos ayuda, se nos dice que tenemos que compartir, que tenemos que dar todo, pero pues no se da la idea de qué es lo que en realidad se tiene que hacer o cómo se comparte.
But my teacher, I remember, she kind of just went like she shrugged, and she said, if you care about any of this, you can raise money for something on the list, and it will help. So we were deciding who would fundraise money for what, and then the well came up. It was the most expensive thing. And I raised my hand.
Ok, que cuando estábamos en clases estábamos hablando que teníamos que juntar dinero para cierta cosa. Entonces teníamos algo que era lo más caro y entonces yo levanté mi mano.
Yeah, and I remember my teacher kind of looked at me and she kind of just raised her eyebrows and was like, "Are you sure?"
Y entonces recuerdo que mi maestra me vio levantar la mano y levantó una ceja y dijo, ¿estás seguro?
Because I wasn't the top student in class, I was just kind of there. Like I didn't participate, I didn't do anything I didn't have to do. So my teacher was concerned.
Porque en realidad yo no era de los que estaba como que siempre al frente de la clase, solamente era de los que estaba ahí, entonces mi maestra se encontraba un poco preocupada al respecto.
She thought I either wasn't serious or I didn't know what I was signing up for, so she said, "Ryan, this is a big part of our fundraiser. Are you sure you can do it?"
Entonces la maestra me dijo que esto era algo muy importante y me hizo la pregunta, Ryan, ¿estás seguro que quieres hacer esto?
And I said, "Don't worry, I have a plan. I'm going to go home to my parents. I'm going to ask them for $70.
Entonces le dije, no te preocupes, llegué a casa, yo pediré a mis padres $70 y problema solucionado.
So I thought it was a great plan. It's not like I wanted to buy something for myself. I think it was Game Boys were the big thing back then. I didn't want a Game Boy. I wanted to do something good. My parents would see us trying to be a nice person and reward me, so it made sense. So I went and asked my parents.
Okay.
Sorry, that was too much. You can simplify that.
Okay.
Creí que era un plan perfecto, no era para mí, era para ayudar a la gente, entonces era sencillo porque no era un Game Boy o algo por el estilo que fue importante en esas épocas, sino era para ayudar a las personas y mis padres me podrían ayudar.
So my parents, they looked at me and they were like, you know, "Aw, that's cute." No. And then ignored me. I think I was 6, so they thought I would just forget about it 5 minutes later.
Entonces mis padres me vieron y dijeron, ah, qué lindo, no. Y creyeron que porque tenía 6 años me olvidaría de eso a los 5 minutos.
But I didn't forget about it 5 minutes later. Every time I had a drink of water, I reminded myself. And I bothered my parents again and again, and it got bad. It got to the point where the situation escalated.
Pero no lo olvidé. Cada vez que tomaba un vaso de agua, recordaba y los fastidiaba al punto donde escalaban las cosas.
I remember we were having like a family Sunday dinner, like all at the dinner table, my 2 brothers, my parents and I, and my mom had this big rule at the house. We had lots of rules, but one of the biggest ones was that we didn't point. My mom thought that pointing was the most rude thing you could ever do.
Entonces, un domingo en una cena estaban mis hermanos, mis 2 hermanos y mis padres, y en las cenas tenemos una regla, una gran regla, que no podemos apuntar.
But my mother especially, she just wasn't listening. So we were all sitting at the table, and I pointed right at her, and I said, "You don't get it. Someone just died because they don't have clean water, and you didn't help them."
Pero mi madre, que era la que menos entendía, ese día me levanté y le apunté directamente a ella y le dije, no lo entiendes, una persona acaba de morir porque no tiene acceso al agua y no la estás ayudando.
So I got a timeout, a short story, but my mom saw that I was serious, so she said, "Okay, if you're serious about this, we're not going to give you the money, but if you're serious, you can do extra work around the house. You'll earn something called an allowance, so you'll get a little bit of money, and you can save that money up, pour this well, if you're serious.
Entonces mi madre vio que yo hablaba en serio y me dijo que aunque no me iba a dar el dinero, podría yo hacer tareas en la casa y me iba a dar un apoyo.
So I already had to do little things around the house, but now I was told I had to vacuum, wash windows, shovel snow, which is very hard in Canada. All these things I didn't do before, and I got a couple of dollars at the end of each week.
Entonces decidí hacerlo y tuve que aspirar, limpiar la casa, limpiar la nieve de la calle, que es algo muy difícil en Canadá para poder conseguir el dinero.
So it was actually a Lent school project. So I had 40 days to save $70. And by the time 40 days had gone by, I had raised the grand total of $25.
Tenía 14 días para tener $70 y para el final de los 14 días logré $25.
So my teacher was a little disappointed, but not surprised, and that could have been that. But my mom and my teacher had always taught me about keeping my commitments. If you commit yourself to something, you see it through. And I made a commitment, so I decided I wanted to keep on going.
Y mis padres creyeron que eso sería todo, pero mi madre y maestra me enseñaron a que tengo que cumplir mis promesas, y yo había hecho una promesa.
So it took me a long time, it took me 4 months, but I was finally able to raise the $70. And I had it all in this cookie tin filled with change. I got the day off of school and I got to bring it in to an organization that actually did that kind of thing. They built wells all over the world.
Entonces me tomó 4 meses para juntar los $70. Y al final de esos $70, de esos 4 meses, llevé ese dinero que tenía guardado a un lugar donde se dedicaban a hacer los pozos.
So I went in and it was a big organization, and I brought in my cookie tin filled with change. I was all dressed up and stuff, and they had the same reaction that my parents did when I came home for the first time. They kind of tilted their heads and said, "Oh, it's adorable, but it's going to cost a lot more than $70 to build a well. It's going to cost at least $2,000.
Así que fui a esa organización, les dio $75 y me dijeron, ok, pero tú necesitas más dinero. Entonces, bueno, necesitas más de los $75. Realmente necesitas $2,000 para que el negocio.
I told them before I left that I would just go home and do more chores and come back once I had $2,000.
Así que regresé a casa a hacer más tareas y más que hacer es para juntar los $2,000.
My dad wasn't there, but I remember when he heard that, he kind of went like, "Oh God."
Mi papá no estaba ahí, pero cuando lo escuchara iba a decir, oh Dios mío.
He did that because he was a grown-up, and he understood that the world has some big problems, and if you're a kid, you can't really fix them by vacuuming your house. And he knew that, and I had a big talk, and I sat down with him one day.
Sí, mi papá era un adulto, entonces él sabía que no iba a solucionar los problemas de nadie solamente aspirando una casa. Entonces él sabía que era un gran reto, pero yo como niño, pues no tenía esa limitante.
I talked to him, and he said, "Ryan, you did a good job. You didn't give up. You showed perseverance and tenacity, big English words for trying your best." And he said, "You should feel proud of that. But it's okay to stop." I think he thought that once I realized how complicated and big the world was and the problems were, that I feel really sad that I couldn't have the impact I wanted.
Entonces mi papá me dijo, ok, lo estás haciendo muy bien, estás haciendo un buen trabajo, eres una persona perseverante, muy tenaz, pero es pertinente que te detengas. Pero yo estaba muy triste de no poder ayudar a las personas, entonces no lo hice.
But I had made the commitment. I was going to build that well. So I kept on doing chores. When that wasn't enough, I did chores for my neighbors. When that wasn't enough, I went back to my school and I started talking to my friends, trying to get them involved. It didn't work very well, so I had to get a little creative. I had my first ever fundraiser, actually. It was a Pokemon card raffle.
Así que yo hice mi compromiso.
Y yo trabajo, fui con mis amigos, fui con mis vecinos, y bueno, pues también hice una recaudación con Pokémones.
So then I had a little, like a basketball tournament in the schoolyard one recess, and then my teacher saw what I was doing and was very impressed that I had an attention span that actually lasted that long, and said, Ryan, why don't you give a little presentation to the class about what you're trying to do?
Ok, entonces, bueno, fui con la maestra, vio la presentación que hice, vio mi perseverancia, vio mi tenacidad y me dijo que presentara algo para la clase y poder lograr la recaudación.
And I really did not want to. When I was younger, I went to speech therapy. I couldn't pronounce my words. I stuttered, so it took me like 3 times to say something, and it was like hard to, it was like I was speaking a different language.
Yo en realidad no quería. Fui a terapia del habla cuando era pequeño, entonces tenía un tartamudeo y me costaba mucho empezar a hablar.
But I got in front of my class and I gave a speech. I think it was less than a minute long. The words didn't really get across. It was bad. But I think the message did. Here was Ryan, the whatever kid in class, that wanted to build this wall. And I think my classmates felt challenged by that, and they said, if Ryan can do that, why can I?
Di la presentación, no fue muy bien, de 2 minutos. Pero el punto se logró y el objetivo fue que mis compañeros se vieron motivados por lo que yo estaba intentando hacer, de hacer un pozo. Si Ryan puede, porque yo no.
And so it grew. My whole class got involved, and then my school, and then my town. And it took a lot of work. It took over a year of fundraising and doing things all over the place, but we were finally able to raise enough money for that month.
Entonces se empezaron a involucrar mis amigos, mi escuela, mi clase, todo el pueblo donde yo vivía, y con el tiempo, después de un año, pudimos juntar ese dinero que era necesario para construir un pozo.
I went towards a school in a country called Uganda in Central Africa, and that school got the first clean water source they had ever had. So it was really cool actually. The school enrollment went from 700 to over 1,400 students, just because the well was put in. So it was great.
Ok, finalmente se construyó el primer pozo en Angola, en un pueblo llamado Dorval, en una escuela. Angola. El costo fue de 700.
I also realized then that one well wouldn't bring the world clean water anymore. So I decided to keep on going and keep on fundraising.
Decidí continuar con el proyecto.
And it got to a few years later, I was actually able to go and see that very first well that was drilled. The school had a big, huge celebration. They had heard that a kid had fundraised money for it. And they were really intrigued and curious, because they thought that if you wanted to be in that culture, if you wanted to have a big impact on the community, you had to be an adult. But the fact that it was a kid, it made them intrigued, and they took that to tell their own students, you don't have to be an adult to make a difference.
Así que se hizo una celebración en la escuela, una gran celebración, porque realmente toqué a varios niños, porque yo como niño logré algo muy grande. Ese es el impacto que vieron los adultos, que un niño pudiera lograr algo, y no necesita ser grande para lograr algo importante. Y fue que quisieron inspirar a sus propios alumnos.
So I went to the school, and there was a big, huge celebration there. There were over 5,000 people, there was a feast and a huge celebration, and everyone was just like pumped and so happy because they had clean water. And I don't have a smile that lights up on my face because I can have a shower in the morning or a glass of water, so to see something that I considered so small, to have that much of an impact on someone's life, it threw me for a loop. It was crazy.
Entonces fui a esta gran celebración, había 5,000 personas, un banquete, todos estaban felices porque tenían agua limpia. Y yo siempre tenía un vaso de agua limpia en casa. Yo siempre podía bañarme y para mí esto era una acción muy pequeña, pero en ese momento me di cuenta que era muy grande. Realmente me tocó.
So I ended up coming back to Canada, and I was incredibly enthusiastic. I started talking to anyone who would listen to me. I started doing presentations outside my town, and then the story spread to little newspapers and little TV shows.
Así que regresé a Canadá con mi vida normal y bueno, todo estaba en la televisión y en los periódicos.
And it got to the point, one night we got a call to the house from a television producer in the United States who wanted to interview me to see if I was good enough to be on a show.
Así que una televisora de los Estados Unidos me quería entrevistar para saber si yo era lo suficientemente bueno.
So I was answering this reporter's questions, and then I hung up the phone, and my parents asked me who had called. And I said, something called the Oprah Winfrey Show.
Oh, así que yo contesté las preguntas por teléfono, mis papás me dijeron, ¿con quién estabas hablando? Y les dije, alguien que se llamaba el show de Oprah.
So then my parents said, do you know what that is?
Así que mis padres me dijeron, ¿sí sabes quién es?
And I said, no.
Y me dijeron,
I would have been 9 turning 10, so I watched, Arthur. So my parents, they took me into our TV room, and they turned on the TV. Sure enough, this person's show was on. And my parents said, this person has a show that a lot of people watch. And if you go on her show and share your story, maybe more people will want to help.
Así que mis papás me llevaron al cuarto, prendieron la televisión y me enseñaron el show de Oprah. Entonces me dijeron, mira, aquí es donde tú saliste, muchísima gente lo ve y seguramente si tú vas a poder tocar a los corazones de más personas.
So I understood a little bit of what it meant. I think at that point, when this person had their talk show and it was broadcast, over 200 million people around the world watched it live.
Así que más de 200,000 personas de hecho vieron este programa, millones, perdón.
So they called back the next day, the producer, and I was in the kitchen answering his questions on the phone, and I remember my parents were across from me, just kind of pretending to make dinner, kind of just listening, and he was asking me all sorts of questions.
Así que contesté el teléfono en la cocina, mis papás pretendían que me escuchaban, pero yo estaba contestando las preguntas.
And he finally asked, can you come to Chicago next Tuesday to be on the show?
Así que finalmente me preguntó, ¿serías capaz de venir a Chicago el siguiente sábado, perdón?
And I said, I'm sorry. I'm busy next Tuesday.
Así que le dije, lo siento, estoy ocupado el siguiente jueves.
And I remember, it's okay, you guys. And I remember, I looked over at my mom, and I think I saw murder in her eyes. She was looking at me like, what are you saying?
Y recuerdo volver a ver a mi mamá y su cara de, ¿qué acabas de decir?
So I covered the phone, I said, he's like, let me talk to your parents. I covered the phone, I said I was not rude, but he wants me to come to Chicago next Tuesday to be on the show.
Entonces tapé el teléfono.
It's
Y me preguntó y me dijo que quería hablar con mis padres y que en realidad necesitaba.
And my mom let out a big sigh and got on the phone and explained that I couldn't come.
Y mi madre le dijo que el siguiente martes yo no podría asistir.
I would have been in grade 4 that year, so I was still in elementary school. But every Tuesday, I signed a pledge at the beginning of the year saying that I would be in the preschool yard during recess on Tuesdays, helping watch over the kindergartners.
Estaba en cuarto grado de primaria para entonces y yo había hecho un compromiso de que todos los martes iba a cuidar a los pequeños del jardín de niños y a cuidarlos todos los martes.
And my mother, who had always taught me about keeping my commitments, knew this and knew that I made a commitment. So she explained that I couldn't come and she hung up the phone.
Y mi madre sabía que yo había hecho este compromiso y sabía que yo tenía que cumplirlo porque ella me lo había enseñado. Entonces le mencionó que yo no podía asistir y colgó el teléfono.
I like to think that looking back, that I would make the same decision. Because the only thing that got me going through the original project is when things changed, how I felt and my goal stayed the same.
Me gustaría pensar que aún en la actualidad tomaría la misma decisión, porque en su momento me agradó que aun cuando las cosas cambiaron, yo seguía en el proyecto original pensando el mismo y siendo el mismo.
So my mom hung up the phone, I ran away, so I didn't get in trouble, because I had let down this big opportunity. And then they called back 15 minutes later, and they said, Thursday, will he come on Thursday?
Entonces, cuando juego, yo salí corriendo para evitar que me regañaran, porque acababa de rechazar algo gigantesco. 15 minutos después volvieron a llamar y dijeron, ¿qué tal el jueves? ¿Puedes llegar el jueves?
So it all worked out. I went on this television show, and then there was a few other things that happened. It was the front page of a popular magazine that people used to read called Reader's Digest, and there was a documentary that came out about the trip that I took to the very first well, and it was this spark that helped us create something called the Ryan's Well Foundation.
Estaba leyendo una revista y tuve una iluminación de cómo podría crear la fundación Ryan's Well.
And since then, that would be 16 years ago now. Since those 16 years have passed, we've been able to do not just one water project, 1,277 water projects.
Eso fue hace 16 años y eso fue hace 1277 pozos.
And it's kind of crazy to think that all that happened because of my overdue grade 1 school project.
Y todo, es algo difícil de pensar que todo eso pasó por un proyecto de la escuela.
And when I was in grade 1, I was not the smartest. I thought one well would bring the entire world clean water. I wasn't a go-getter. I liked sitting in the back and waiting for things to be over so I could go to recess. I wasn't anything.
Era algo impresionante porque yo no era el más brillante, yo era alguien que se sentaba hasta atrás intentando y no era nada importante, tratando de llevar agua a todo el mundo.
And what I mean by that is that I think if you were to pick a person to have an impact in the world, I would have been the last person you would have picked, especially for something that affects the entire world as a kid.
Y cuando lo pienso, no hubiera sido yo la persona que hubiera sido para realizar esto, porque yo sería la última para hacer algo que cambiaría a todo el mundo.
And I was a regular kid. I got average grades, and I was excited to go home on the weekends and play video games. There wasn't anything special about me.
Era un chico regular. Yo no quería. Yo estaba buscando hacer algo los sábados, jugar videojuegos, no cambiar el mundo.
And I think now, I look back on, I'm 27 now, the last over 20 years, volunteering and working hard and fundraising, and all these things. The hardest thing I ever had to do in all of it was raise my hand.
Y ahora lo pienso, siendo 27, que lo más difícil en su momento fue levantar la mano.
I found something that I was passionate about, and I may not have had all the answers or knew what I was doing, but I knew how I felt, so I raised my hand, and all of this happened. So I think it's a testament that if you find something you do care about, it's easy to find a reason not to do it. Instead, think like a 6-year-old and find the reason to do it, even if you don't know everything, and see what happens.
Ok, en ese momento lo más especial fue levantar la mano. Si tú te sientes conectado con eso, levanta tu mano. No importa si tienes 6 años, lo que sea, si sientes eso especial, hazlo.
Thank you so much for listening today, guys. It was my pleasure coming and talking with you here today. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.
We have a little bit of extra time. If there are any questions at all from anyone, I'd be more than happy to answer any preguntas. Any questions about the story or Ryan's Well or how we do our work?